Well, we want to wish all the dads a happy Father's Day. Thank you for being in church today. Thank you for making sure that your family is in church, not just on today, but every single weekend, making sure that they're worshiping and loving Christ. You know, one of the prayer requests that I often hear from ladies is they say, man, I just wish that my husband loved Jesus. I wish he took our faith seriously and helped lead in this way at home. So dads, thank you for leading with strength and making sure that you're at church every weekend. If you're a single guy, I would say this, you being here today, learning about your faith, growing in your faith is helping you to become the person that you're praying for, who's also praying for you one day to be that person in their home. So thank you for being here. Well, today we're wrapping up the series called Happiness According to Jesus. We've been going through the Beatitudes. This is the beginning of the message that Jesus gives called the Sermon on the Mount. You can find it in Matthew 5, 6, and 7. And as we wrap it up today, I want to ask you a question. How many of you would say that I just kind of want to be liked? Right? Like when I think about happiness, I want to be liked. I'm kind of worried some of you didn't raise your hands, right? Like, what's the opposite? You want to be disliked, right? Like, that's not the goal of life, is to be disliked, you know? So many of us, the choices that we make, the things we do in life is to be liked or to be accepted. I mean, remember about a decade ago when skinny jeans came out, right? And like all the dads, you know, it's like, all the dads were like, I will never, ever wear a pair of skinny jeans. It's just not gonna happen. But then what happened? A lot of middle-aged men started looking like that, right? They wanted to fit in, they wanted to be accepted. Thankfully, the trend is away from skinny jeans now towards more baggy. I tell my kids, that's what fashion has to do. It always has to do the opposite of whatever's in style so you know who's out and who's in, right? Well, so thankfully that phrase is out. I know what some of you dads are thinking. You're like, I have never bought a pair of skinny jeans in my life. I only wear Carhartts. And why do you wear Carhartts and use Milwaukee tools? Because everybody else on the job site does the exact same thing, right? What we wear, not even only what we wear, but also what we drink, right? There's only one type of coffee you can walk up to a job site carrying. Do you know what that is? It's Stewart's coffee, right? No one dare walks up on a job site with a pinkety-dinkety drink from like Starbucks, right? You don't do that. But of course, if you have a high schooler, they would rather walk into school with no coffee than to come in with a Stewart's coffee, right? It can only be Starbucks. But not only that, think about hairstyles. I remember looking at some pictures of my old pictures of my grandmother, and I saw a picture and I was like, Grandma, why does your hair look like that? And she said, well, everybody's hair looked like that. It was called the beehive, and that was the style. Then my kids, they look at pictures of my wife now from the 80s, and they're like, why is your hair... That's not my wife though, but you know, some of you were like, that took a whole can of Aquanet to make that happen, right? Like, and they're like, was it crunchy, like potato chips? Yes, and everybody had big hair. It's just what we did. You know, when you think about clothes, you think about glasses, right? You know, glasses get really small, then they get really big and stuff. You just look at pictures over the years, you just see how it changes. And of course, we change with it. Why? Because we want to be accepted or liked. How many of you have been a victim of a 0.5 photo from your middle schooler? Yes, yeah, me, I have been a victim. I keep telling them, I'm like, listen, why do you take these pictures, and why is it, they're like, it's funny, Dad, just to see a big forehead. I'm like, your kids one day are gonna look at all the pictures you've taken and say, why did you think it was so funny just to see a giant forehead all of the time, right? So for many people, happiness would boil down to just being liked, right? And that kind of makes sense. Of course, the goal isn't in life to be disliked, to be hated, you know? And so as we think about that, and as we think about particularly our faith, there's a lot of things about our faith that makes it easy for Christians to be liked, right? I mean, we're to be kind, we're to be patient with one another, slow to get angry, we're to be compassionate, we help care for the poor and the defenseless. I mean, those are all kinds of things that make it easy for followers of Jesus to be liked. But that's not the whole story, is it? Because there are some things that if we truly are following Christ, that causes us to be disliked as followers of Jesus. And so let me ask you, have you ever experienced rejection because of your faith before? Not just being disliked, but being rejected. Maybe for some of you, it's a coworker that laughs that you're at church on the weekend. Maybe, it's a boss. It's like, why do you got to be so uptight? Can't you just go along to get along? Maybe for you, it was your father who made fun of you for taking faith seriously. Maybe it was an educator. Maybe it was an educator in college who made fun of you that you believe that Jesus actually rose from the dead. Maybe it was an educator in high school because you believe the miracles of the Bible, the New Testament, actually happened. Have you ever experienced rejection for your faith? At some point, if you follow Christ, we're going to feel and experience that of what it's like, not just to be disliked for our faith, but also to be persecuted for our faith. And so that creates two choices for us. We go through life trying to be liked, or we go through life trying to figure out, how do I faithfully follow Christ? And it creates in this culture that we live in this tension of, I want to be liked, I want to be accepted, I just kind of want to fit in, but then I desperately want to follow Christ faithfully. And how do I do that in this culture that I find myself in? It's interesting, as Jesus wraps up this beatitude here, this introduction to the message, he talks about this whole section of happiness. And this is the only, what's unique about this beatitude is he gives us the principle, and this is the only one where he then begins to explain it and personalize it for us. So let's read it. Matthew chapter 5, verse 10, our 8th beatitude, our last one. Jesus says, God blesses those who are persecuted for doing right, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. And then now it gets very personal. He begins to explain it. Verse 11, he says, God blesses you when people mock you and persecute you and lie about you and say all sorts of evil things against you because you are my followers. And then in verse 12, he says this, but be happy about it. Wait, be happy about persecution. He says, be very glad, for a great reward awaits you in heaven. And remember, the ancient prophets were persecuted in the same way. Jesus is saying, I want you to be very happy, be very glad. If someone ever lies about you, mocks you, or says something about you about your faith, he said, why? Because you're going to have a great reward. Now, listen, it's not just that people dislike us. Jesus says it's much worse than that. Remember what he said here in verse 11? Jesus says that people are going to mock you, persecute you, and say all sorts of evil things about you if you choose to truly follow me. Doesn't that make you so happy? Right? Aren't you just so excited? Like, I can't wait, Jesus. Thank you. This sounds amazing. Well, I don't know. I can't believe I've been missing this my whole life. Now, lest you think this is just kind of like a one-off teaching of Jesus, John records this where Jesus says in John chapter 15 and verse 18, Jesus says, if the world hates you, remember that it hated me first. Okay, this just keeps getting worse and worse, right? Not just being persecuted and not, we're talking about, that's a long way away from being liked. Now we're talking about being hated. Why is Jesus saying this? And why is that supposed to make me happy? I mean, when you think about it, sometimes people will say, and maybe you've heard some people say this before, hey, I like Jesus, I just don't like the church. And sometimes I wonder, like, are you sure you read everything about Jesus? Because Jesus said that they hated me, and if they hated me, they'll hate you. Now you say, well, I'm not sure that everybody hated Jesus. They crucified him. You don't crucify people you like, right? Why did they crucify? They recognized what Jesus was saying, and it infuriated them. So why in the world would this make us happy to have people lie about us, mock us, and persecute us as followers of Jesus? So here's the first thing I want you to write down today, okay? You ready? Here's the first thing. Persecution isn't failure, it's confirmation. And sometimes we feel like it's failure to be disliked, to be mocked for our faith. But it's not failure, it's confirmation. And you're saying confirmation of what? It's confirmation that you are a true, legitimate follower of Jesus. You're not a bandwagon Christian. You're not a Christmas and Easter kind of Christian. You are a bona fide follower of Jesus. You are someone who is on fire for Jesus, and those around you recognize it. To say, wow, okay, I'm not just a fair weather fan. Okay, people recognize that I truly do want to honor Jesus in all of my actions and choices. That he is my Lord, he is my King. That I believe what he says and I'm trying to live what he says. He said it's not failure. Persecution is not failure. Instead, it's confirmation. Now, maybe we could flip this around. I think this could also be true. If no one ever pushes back, that could also be confirmation. Confirmation of what? Maybe you're not really following Jesus. Maybe you're just a fair weather fan. Maybe you're just a Christmas and Easter kind of follower of Jesus instead of a true follower of Jesus. Now, at this point, I think it's very, very important that we make something clear, crystal clear. The persecution that Jesus is talking about is received by his followers. It's not inflicted on the world around us, okay? When Jesus is not saying you're blessed when you persecute other people who don't believe what you believe. Jesus is saying that you and I are persecuted or blessed when you and I receive persecution. And that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Because a lot of times Christians think, well, my job is to go around the world and make sure everybody lives the way Christians should live. And I hope that you understand that is not an assignment that God has given to us. This is not something that Jesus is asking of us. Now let me ask you, or maybe this will help. Can you imagine if some of the Muslims started persecuting us because we don't dress the way that they dress or eat what they eat, or because you don't fast on Ramadan? Can you imagine Muslims started saying, you're an abomination to Allah because of what you eat. You're an abomination to Allah because of the way that you dress. And you're like, wait, hold on just a second here. I'm not a follower of Allah. I'm not Muslim. I shouldn't have to dress that way. I shouldn't have to eat that. I shouldn't have to, follow what your codes are because I'm not a Muslim. And so many of the people in the world are saying the same thing. They're saying, I'm not a follower of Jesus. Why are you expecting me to act like followers of Jesus should act? Remember what Jesus said here in Matthew 5 and verse 10? Let's look at it again. He said, blessed are those who are persecuted for doing right. He's not saying, blessed are those who persecute in the name of right. That's totally different. That's a different kind of thing. Remember, the persecution that Jesus is talking about is received by Christians. It's not inflicted by Christians on other people who don't believe what you and I believe. Because what is that? What happens? You know what the result is of that? When Christians demand that non-Christians live the way that Christians are supposed to live, what is created is moralism, or we could call it cultural Christianity. That's a false gospel. That gospel says, as long as everything is okay on the outside, you earn God's approval. You earn his stamp. The gospel is not that you can earn your way to heaven. The gospel is not that you do enough good things that outweigh your bad and you kind of squeak through by the skin of your teeth. That's not what the gospel is. The gospel is there's nothing you and I can do to make up for the sin that we've committed. Jesus, we accept what Jesus did for us on the cross and his forgiveness. It's an act of grace that he gives to us. Moralism says you can earn God's approval. Remember one of the Beatitudes we looked at 2 weeks ago where Jesus said, blessed are those who are pure in heart. He was saying that it starts internally. Purity starts inside of us, and then it begins to work its way on the outside. Not starting on the outside, and then maybe things will get fixed on the inside. We want to reject cultural Christianity. We want to reject moralism. That is not the gospel. Now, Jesus does something very, very interesting when he talks here about this beatitude. Now, Jesus does something, we already talked about this for a second, where we said Jesus gives the principle and then he explains it. But Jesus also personalizes it. Notice this here in Matthew chapter 5, verses 10 through 12. Jesus uses third person when he talks about the principle. God blesses those, that's third person, who are persecuted for doing right. For the kingdom of heaven is theirs, that is third person. Now he personalizes it and moves to second person. He says, God blesses you when people mock you, when they persecute you, when they lie about you. Jesus, when he's saying you, he's not talking about, Christianity in some kind of global way. When Christians in general get mocked, he's saying, no, when you are mocked, when you are lied about, when you are persecuted, specifically, why? Why is that happening? All because you're trying to live like Jesus. All because you believe what Jesus taught. That is where the persecution is coming from. Not Christians in this part of the world or that part of the world or this part of our country, but you specifically. So you know what he's saying here? He's saying following Jesus, not only does it set you apart, it also puts a bullseye. It puts a target on your back. Because remember, this whole thing, Jesus is saying, this is what my kingdom is going to look like. Followers in my kingdom, this will be true of them. Over here, this is what the world's kingdom looks like. This is what the religious kingdom looks like. This is what, the Roman kingdom looks like. But Jesus is saying, this is what my kingdom. And if you're going to be a part of my kingdom, these behaviors, these practices, these beliefs is what it looks like. And so he's saying here, following Jesus will set you apart, but it also will put a target on your back. Now, what were some of the lies and persecution that people said about Jesus? I've got a list for you. This isn't an exhaustive list, but it has a few of those things that people said about Jesus. They said that his power was from Satan. They said that Jesus was demon-possessed, that he was a false teacher, that he was a drunkard and a glutton, that he was a friend of evil people. All lies, not true, mocking what Jesus said. What might be some lies that people would say about you? They might say that you're a science hater because you believe that Jesus truly rose from the dead. They might say that you're narrow-minded because you say what Jesus said, that he is the only way to the Father. They might slap a label on you and call you a bigot. So many things, so many lies that they could say or persecute you. Why? Because you are a follower of Jesus. So here's the second thing I want you to write down today. First of all, we said persecution is validation for us. So here's the second thing. Persecution is validation. It's not victimhood. It's not victimhood. So many Christians walk around like they're a victim. I just can't believe what happened in culture and what they're saying, and it's just so horrible. It's just so bad. I think I need to move to the Bible Belt. It's so hard living in the Northeast. And they're acting like they're a victim, where Jesus is saying you should be happy. It's validating that you are a true follower of Christ. You're on fire for him. You're not a fair weather fan. Now, lest we get, too dramatic here about persecution. And when Jesus' first hearers were hearing this, they understood that persecution looked like crucifixion. It looked like being fed to lions in a circus or coliseum. And so they understood that. Now today, that's not the case in our country, but it is still the case in other countries around the world. When we think of Nigeria, we think of Somalia, we think of North Korea, we think of Iran, Pakistan, Afghanistan, parts of India. For you to be a follower of Christ, a sold out, on fire follower of Jesus could very much cost you your life. That's not the reality that we find ourselves here in our country or even in our state. In New York, we don't have martyrdom, but do you know what we do have? We have marginalization. So you're not going to be fed to the lions, but they will feed lies about you. You're not going to die on the sword, but they will attack you with shame. They're not going to throw rocks at you, but they will throw labels at you. They're not going to burn you alive, but they would love to burn your platform down and give you lots of one-star reviews filled with lies. They're not going to call the police on you, but they will call the word police on you. And they'll say, you're intolerant. Do you know what tolerance used to mean? Tolerance used to mean you and I disagree with each other, but we don't have to be disagreeable. That's not what tolerance means anymore. Do you know what tolerance means today? It means endorsement. Endorsement. And there is a huge difference between acceptance and endorsement. You can accept people without loving all of the choices that they make. Do you know who's really good at that? Your mama. Yeah, she doesn't love all the choices you make, right? Your daddy. He doesn't love all the choices that you make. He accepts you without having to endorse and love all the choices that you make. It's possible to love people without loving all of the choices that they make. But that's not where we are in culture. Our culture demands that you endorse every behavior. And that is what makes it so hard for us as a follower of Christ. It's what made it so hard for first century Christians. They were asked to believe that a lie was the truth. And what was the lie? That Caesar is Lord. That Caesar is the Son of God. That Caesar is divine and deserved to be worshiped. And you know what first century Christians did? Well, we can accept that. We can let you worship Caesar as Lord. That's fine. We can't endorse Caesar as Lord because we know that's a lie. That Jesus the Christ is the only true Lord. He is the King of Kings. And they would refuse to accept that that lie was the truth, and it cost them their life. For a simple belief about who Jesus is, what he looked like, and why he came. Now, listen, this does not mean that as Christians we're to be quarrelsome with culture. Some people hear this and they think, oh, well, this means I need to go out there and post a bunch of whole memes about everything that I think is sinful and, force some people who don't believe what we believe to try to live the way that we're required to live as followers of Jesus. And then people come back, they're quarrelsome, they go out there, they start getting in all these debates with people, and then they come back with a black eye and call it persecution. I'm like, no, you were just being a jerk. You deserve that black eye. I'm surprised worse didn't happen to you. Okay, we are not called to be quarrelsome with culture or other people who don't believe. In fact, this is what Paul tells Timothy in 1 Timothy 2 in chapter 2. He says, pray this way. We're to pray for kings and all who are in authority. Why? So that we can live peaceful and quiet lives. Peaceful and quiet lives marked by godliness and dignity. Whew. There's a lot of people who think they're taking a stand for Jesus, and that's not true of them. They're not peaceful. They're not quiet. It's not marked with dignity. They're just throwing rocks and stones, and then wondering why they're getting beat up. That's not what God has asked us to do. In fact, Paul writes this in 1 Corinthians 5. He says, it isn't my responsibility to judge outsiders. That's not our role. But it certainly is your responsibility to judge those inside the church who are sinning. You know what Paul is saying? He's saying, start with your own house first. Start with your church. Start with your own house, which you live in first. And let's get that right. Let's get our house in order first before we start wanting to throw stones at other people who don't live or believe what we believe. So what might persecution look like today? You might be persecuted today for saying that for just repeating back what Jesus said, that Jesus said he is the only way to the Father. That takes a certain amount of spine to say that today. You might be persecuted for refusing to look the other way with the numbers at the company that you work for. You have a choice, go along or get along, but you're like, I can't say a lie is the truth. I can't say a lie is the truth because I know these numbers aren't matching. And you're asked to endorse something that you know is not true. You might be persecuted for teaching your children the New Testament sexual ethic. You might be persecuted for that. Timothy says this, or Paul writes to Timothy again. He says, yes, and everyone who wants to live a godly life in Christ Jesus. Is that true for you? Do you want to live a godly life? Some Christians don't want to live a godly life. But do you want to live a God honoring life. To say that Jesus is Lord over every area of my life. He's God over every area of my life, of my behaviors, of my thoughts, my sexuality, my finances, my calendar. He says, everyone who wants to live a godly life in Christ Jesus will suffer persecution, some kind of persecution. Yay. Aren't you so happy about that? Kind of sounds like Jesus is saying, you're going to get a root canal and you're going to like it. You know, it's kind of like, what is Jesus saying here? You know, I know some of you are thinking, Pastor Roscoe's a little spicy today. Not only do we have hot sauce, but he's a little spicy today too. Well, let's look at what Jesus says here. Matthew 5 and verse 12. He says, be happy about it. Be very glad, for a great reward awaits you in heaven. And remember, the ancient prophets were persecuted in the same way. You know what Jesus is saying? Jesus is saying rejection on earth creates a great recognition in heaven. Jesus is saying every lie, every laugh, every time they mock you, every time they persecute you, Jesus is saying it's creating a great reward. He will pay you back. I mean, can you imagine that? Can you imagine telling your kids, like, hey, listen, if you do your homework, I'm going to give you a great reward. And you're like, isn't that kind of what I'm supposed to be doing? Like as a student, am I not supposed to be doing? And you're going to reward me for something I'm already supposed to be doing. Well, maybe we can say it this way. How many of you are Yankees fans? All right, my people right there. All right, how many of you are Red Sox fans? Raise your hand. Okay, we have our prayer team up front who would love to pray for you after service, and we can do that. Well, if you go into Yankee Stadium, there's something kind of interesting in there. There's these banners as soon as you walk into the stadium. And you know who these banners are? They're of great players from the past. The ones who have made the Yankees not just a New York team, not just an American favorite team, but a worldwide team. You go into airports across the world, anywhere in the world, you'll find them selling hats of what team? The Yankees. And here, these have made them a dynasty, these great names. And then if you go to the game even earlier, there's something behind center field. It's called Monument Park. And this is all the numbers of retired players. So can you imagine you're walking through Monument Park and one of the people, they grab you by the arm, one of the employees there, and they're like, hey, we just want you to know that next year we're inducting you into Monument Park. And you're like, me? Like, I can't hit a fastball. What are you talking about? I could never strike out one of these players. Listen, if I have to run around the bases, I'm probably gonna get winded, Like, what would I do that's worthy of being in Monument Park? Well, we've noticed that every time we play the Yankees and they boo us and they say Yankees suck and, they got that chant going, you just stand tall and you keep cheering for our team. You're like, but isn't that kind of like what a fan is supposed to do? Like, aren't we supposed to cheer for our team, win or lose? Aren't we supposed to always have the team's back no matter what? No matter if it's a terrible season or amazing season and good fortune or bad fortune, that we are always cheering for our team. You know what Jesus says here? Jesus says, not only will you have a great reward in heaven, but your name will also be mentioned here with the prophets of old. And you're like, what did I do? I didn't do anything like Jeremiah. I wasn't thrown to like the lion's den like Daniel. What did I do that was so special that they would even think of my name with the other prophets who were persecuted before me? I didn't preach to thousands of people in some giant crusade. I didn't give my life, serving lepers in India. But you know what you did? You never said a lie was the truth. You kept following Jesus, whether it was popular or not popular. You continued to say that Jesus Christ and live that Jesus Christ is Lord over every area of your life. You see, the world may not cheer for you, but heaven does. Heaven does. And every single one of us at some point in our life will stand before a blood-stained Jesus with nail scars in his hands, who died for each one of us And our prayer is to hear, well done, my good and faithful servant. Do you know, so why is this a big deal? Why should it make us happy to be persecuted? We've talked about a couple of things already. We said one is it identifies you as a true follower of Jesus. We're not a victim, it's validation. There's a great reward for us in heaven. Here's the other thing I want you to write down today, is that Jesus takes it personally when you're persecuted. Jesus takes it as a personal affront to him. So anytime someone laughs at you or mocks you because of your faith and the way that you live, Jesus feels personally attacked. You say, well, Jesus, you say, well, Pastor, why would you say that Jesus feels that way? You know, there was someone before he decided to follow Jesus who spent his entire life trying to stamp out the movement of Jesus. You know him as the Apostle Paul, but before he was the Apostle Paul, he was known as Saul. And his job was going around trying to stamp out this Jesus movement. He would have families executed, broken up families, send them to jail, destroyed businesses. And on his way to arrest some followers of Jesus, Jesus stops Paul in his tracks, named Saul, and he says this to him. He says, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? Jesus said, why are you persecuting my followers in Antioch or Tarsus or Jerusalem? He says, why are you persecuting me? Jesus takes it very personally when people attack us or persecute us. And what would be our great crime? That we believe the teachings of Jesus and we try to live them personally. So let me ask you 3 questions as we wrap up. Where have you personally been persecuted for your faith? You're like, I'm not sure that I ever have been. Why is that? Why is that? I think that's a question you should wrestle with. I'm not saying the answer is wrong or bad, but I think it's something you should wrestle with. Here's the second question. Where have you been trying to hide your faith in Jesus? Tomorrow morning, hey, what'd you do this weekend for Father's Day? Uh-oh. Well, I went to this hot wings thing and I got this bottle of hot sauce, Or I went to church. I love it. I need it. Do you go to church anywhere? If not, I'd love to talk to you about it. What does it look like when you're in the cafeteria? And normally, if you were alone, you would bow your head and pray and thank God for the resources that he's provided for you, the meal, his grace to you. But when other people are around, God, you know my heart. You know my heart. Verses saying, I want to be like Daniel. I don't care who's watching or what they know or what they think. The only thing that matters to me is what King Jesus thinks. They can laugh at me, they can persecute me, they can call me every manner of evil and lie about me. But the only thing that matters to me is Jesus. Now here's the last thing. Where have you been going along to get along? Maybe it's at work. Maybe it's with someone that you're dating. And that can be kind of scary because you're like, man, if I say I can't say a lie as a truth, I might lose my job. I might lose my job. Some of you are thinking, man, if my boyfriend or girlfriend knows how serious I am about my relationship with Christ, I might be single a little bit longer. Listen, it's okay. You truly are not alone. Your church family is with you. But the most important thing is when you and I stand before Jesus to hear, well done, my good and faithful servant. You will be repaid back. A great award or reward awaits you because you followed Christ. You were willing to have people mock you or laugh at you or say all manner of evil against you. Why? That's what followers of Jesus do. That's what it means to be a part of his kingdom. To say the only opinion that matters to me is what Jesus, my Lord, thinks of me. Let's pray together today. So let me ask you, are you a fair weather Christian? Are you a Christmas and Easter Christian? Or are you one who says, listen, I want the world to know that I'm on fire for Jesus. I want the world to know that their life would be so much better with him. And maybe you're here today and you've realized, man, I don't know if I even know Jesus or have a relationship with him. What do I do? How do I start that? I think starting of your faith journey is acknowledging who Jesus is and why he came. You say, well, how do I do that? The best way I know to do that is through a prayer. So if you're ready, here's a prayer I want to invite you to pray to begin following Christ. Would you say this? Would you say, Jesus, I believe you are who you say that you are. The way, the truth, the life, the only way to the Father. I ask that you would come into my life, forgive me of my sins, and make all things new. If you prayed that prayer today, after church, we'd love for you to come meet our prayer team up front. We'd love to give you a new believer's packet. Others of you, would you pray, say, God, give me the strength. Would you say, God, strengthen my spine, my backbone to stand for you. I don't want to say or acknowledge that a lie is the truth. Would you say, God, help me to move my faith out of the closet, to not hide my light under a bushel, but to let it shine in brightness and love and in grace in those around me. Father, today, as your children, we thank you that you are a good, good Father. God, and if following you ever causes us to be put into the fire, God, we know that you are with us. And our prayer, God, is that you would be magnified, you would be glorified in all of our choices and decisions. And that our life, as we follow you and honor you, would cause so many people in the capital region to be curious about why this is the most important thing to us. We ask all of these things in Jesus' name. Amen.